No, I believe this jury had no choice but to conclude as it did because the judge led them right to the fountain of guilt and said, drink, horsey, drink. So they did. So I don't have much disdain for the jury or its decision because they followed the instructions that this judge gave them. But I have a lot of disdain for this judge, and not to mention this prosecutor. And I think they were working in concert the entire time to do one thing, which is fulfill Alvin Bragg's campaign promise to get Trump. And I have to say, I really disagree with what Cuomo said a minute ago, which is Trump only has himself to blame for this particular problem. That's just not true. That he has a partisan hack of a DA to blame for this particular problem, a DA who doesn't want to prosecute any crime unless it's by a man named Trump.
Hello, my friends. J.R. Dukes with you once again. I want to extend a warm welcome to all my free-minded friends out there. Got another great video coming at you today. I'm going to tell you something. Megyn Kelly sometimes hits it out of the park, and she hit it out of the park once again. We all know Dan Abrams. To be honest with you, I like Dan Abrams, and I like some of his shows. I think he's got a new version of Cops running right now, and occasionally I will watch that particular program. But he is liberal. He is definitely one of the many Mr. Liberals, and ABC, Good Morning America in the morning time, just loves to have Dan Abrams on there as a commentator. He, like many woke liberals, has no idea what he's talking about. In this video, Megyn Kelly, she schools him. Just wait and see this.
One thing, which is fulfill Alvin Bragg's campaign promise to get Trump. And I have to say, I really disagree with what Cuomo said a minute ago, which is Trump only has himself to blame for this particular problem. That's just not true. That he has a partisan hack of a DA to blame for this particular problem, a DA who doesn't want to prosecute any crime unless it's by a man named Trump.
We all know how outrageous this verdict was with former President Donald Trump. We all realized for the first time for many of us just how two-tiered, how unfair our justice system is. This verdict against former President Donald Trump was clearly nothing more, nothing less than a political persecution, not a prosecution. You had a judge who has a daughter. They are both Democratic operatives. The daughter has made in excess of $93 million for many different Democratic candidates, including but not limited to currently President Joe Biden, Vice President Kamala Harris, and of course, Adam Schiff. And we know what former President Donald Trump calls Adam Schiff, as I always like to say. Outrageous the way this entire trial was conducted. And folks, unlike many other talking heads on the TV or on YouTube, I do hold the jury responsible. Our justice system was set up by our founding fathers to make sure that a jury could stop this type of nonsense. And unfortunately, this jury did not do their job as civic citizens, put aside their hate, their distrust, their sincere hatred for former President Donald Trump. They convicted him anyways, which is extremely unfortunate because it does not put our country's interests first. And that is a shame and a crime for each and every one of us.
The number of legal hoops that he had to jump through in order to bring this case in the first place were too numerous to outlay on this brief program. And he had a judge who allowed it at every turn to the point where, I mean, the past couple of days, Dan, I've been talking to Garagos, Dershowitz, Mike Davis, Dave Ehrenberg. These are guys on all sides of the political aisle, not just lefties or righties, who still are confused about exactly what it was Trump was charged with. So the judge was complicit, and it was not a valid claim, not from the start.
And it certainly was. Now, follow this argument here, because you're going to find out very quickly that Dan Abrams specifically doesn't even know what former President Donald Trump was convicted of. As many of us out there are confused, we don't even know what the crime is, per se, that former President Trump was convicted of.
Again, you're separating out almost the moral from the legal. I mean, Cuomo was making a moral point, I think, to some degree, which is that there's wrongdoing here, right? There was definitely wrongdoing. Whether it should have been a crime is a separate... What's the wrongdoing? What's the wrongdoing? All right, number one, it's paying $130,000 to a porn star to keep her quiet. That's what.
Oh my goodness, can you believe he said that? It is not illegal, folks, to pay a porn star $130,000 to keep her quiet. NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, are very commonplace in America. They've been that way for many, many years, and there's nothing illegal about trying to influence an election in this particular matter. You are going to see very clearly that Dan Abrams doesn't know what he's talking about.
That's to try to protect your campaign. Can we at least agree that's wrong?
That's not illegal. not
I didn't say
illegal.
it was. No. I just said moral
How
versus
is it
legal.
wrong? Are we talking moral?
Yeah, he's trying to back out. He knows he stepped in it. He knows he's wrong, and he's trying to find some wiggle room here. But Megyn is not going to take any of it.
Made it clear. I'm making it clear. For a minute, I'm talking about morality versus legality, right? There's no doubt that he engaged in.
All right, I'll tell. Here's my response to that, and I said this on my show the other day. I don't know what kind of weird marriage these two have. Same as I didn't know what kind of weird marriage Bill and Hillary Clinton had. So I don't know what their covenant is in terms of what he's allowed to do on the outside of his marriage.
But again, I don't mind the sex, but when you're paying $100, but I'm not talking about the sex.
He goes, I don't mind the sex. I'll just let it go at that.
I'm talking about the $130,000 to keep her quiet to protect his campaign.
Immoral? There's nothing wrong with that at all. Nothing.
Really? Okay. Look, again,
See, he doesn't know what he's talking about. There's nothing illegal, nothing morally wrong, in my opinion, to pay someone to keep quiet. Again, these NDAs are very commonplace.
If somebody runs for office, they just lose the right to have any privacy. They just have to let us see all of their dirty laundry from the moment they declare forward, or somehow they've done something morally wrong or legally wrong.
When you're doing it to protect the campaign and you are spending money on it, then now I'm going to switch back to the legal. You are now crossing the line into legal problems.
No.
Right?
You aren't. That's absolutely not right. Incorrect at every level.
Again, the idea that let me back up. And you don't think he falsified business records either?
Let me back up. That's code for, oops, I stepped in it. I've messed up. She got me.
I don't know what he did. I don't think he wrote down.
What does that mean? We just had a whole trial. We heard every detail of this. How can you not know?
Let me answer.
Please.
Let me answer. I don't think he wrote down hush money payment to Stormy Daniels. Nobody who pays hush money would write down such a thing. I think he wrote down, or someone at the Trump organization wrote down, legal expenses from the drop-down Adobe menu. And that made as much sense as anything else because hush money wasn't an option. He was paying his lawyer who had made the payment to Stormy Daniels, and he was, I believe, reimbursing her, though he denied that, reimbursing him, though he denied that on the stand. I don't think there's anything wrong with doing that. I think you pay your lawyer money because he outlaid money for you. You could easily classify that as a legal expense.
No matter what it's for, right? Even if it's illegal conduct, you can just put it's a legal expense, right?
This wasn't illegal. There's nothing illegal about paying hush money for an NDA. It's done
There's not.
all the
time. But when you're doing it to protect your campaign, it is.
Wrong.
That's the difference.
No. What law are you citing, Dan?
Campaign finance laws. You're not allowed to give the...
You don't know what you're...
See, this shows, folks, that these campaign finance laws are very, very complex. They are very difficult to frankly understand, decipher, whatever. And this is the reason why generally it is for the federal government only to prosecute campaign finance crimes. The fact that you have a city DA, Alvin Bragg, prosecuting this just adds to the nonsense that's going on in this particular case.
Know what you're talking
about.
You're wrong.
Explain to me. Tell me what I'm getting wrong. Tell me what I'm getting wrong. When you're spending $130,000,
I'll explain.
Go ahead.
I get it, because you're saying that there are limits to the campaign contributions somebody could make, and this has exceeded them, and then they hit it. I understand. That's his theory. However, this has been wrong from the start.
Yeah.
It does not amount to a campaign contribution if it is the kind of payment that could ever be made outside of the campaign content.
Boom. That's what we talked about in many previous videos. It is the way the law is written. And the bottom line is this, as again, we've talked about this many times, is if you're a candidate and the expense in question you would have had, whether or not you are a candidate, then that expense is generally personal. End of discussion. If it's an expense that you have only because you are a candidate, then you can write it, deduct it out of the campaign legally. And that's exactly what former President Trump did. He had an expense, this NDA to the porn star. He did not want his wife to find out about it. He paid for it personally. Can you believe that? If he would have paid for it through the campaign, he would have already been indicted earlier because they would have said, oh, no, this was clearly a personal expense. He should not have used donated money through the campaign to pay off this porn star. Folks, this was an outrageous verdict.
The standard is substantiality. It's not. It's substantiality.
No, it's not.
Yes, it is.
You're wrong.
Okay.
No, it's not.
I guess we're going to have to agree.
There's been Supreme Court precedent on this. Talk to Brad Smith, who was the FEC commissioner.
that
You're
the
wrong.
standard
You're
is
wrong.
substantiality. All right.
All right. So you heard Dan Abrams saying substantiality is the key to this particular question as to whether or not the law was broken. Well, let's go ahead and take a quick dive into this. On your screen, you'll see something I pulled from Chat GPT, and I asked the AI, hey, tell me about the differences in this particular case. It says, quickly, when determining whether a payment is classified as a campaign expense or a personal expense under United States campaign finance law, the standard generally involves assessing the purpose of the expense. Like we just talked about. The key question is to whether the expense would exist irrespective of the candidate's campaign. Okay, and then it goes on. Here are primary considerations. Would the expense exist if the candidate's not running for office? This is a fundamental test. If the expense would not exist, if the individual were not a candidate, it is more likely to be considered a campaign expense. Conversely, if the expense would exist regardless of the candidacy, it is typically deemed a personal expense. And then you heard Dan Abrams talk about substantiality. While not the primary criterion, the substantiality of the expenses can be considered when evaluating its necessity in connection to the campaign. The Federal Election Commission, FEC, provides guidance on this matter. According to FEC, campaign funds may be used for expenses that are directly related to the campaign for activities related to the duties of the federal office holder. However, campaign funds cannot be used for personal expenses, which are defined as any expense that would exist even if the candidate were not running for office or were not a federal office holder. So this is exactly what we've been talking about. It is not what Dan Abrams said. It is what I have been telling you, Megyn Kelly has said, that it has to do with the reality of the expense. Here's the conclusion, and this is according to the AI. In summary, the standard used in determining whether a check or payment is a campaign expense or personal expense primarily revolves around whether the expense would exist if the candidate were not running for office. And then it goes into what Dan Abrams was claiming. The substantiality of the expense can also be a factor, but the primary criterion is the necessity and direct relation of the expense to the campaign activities. Boom. So my hat's off to Megyn Kelly. She definitely put Dan Abrams, one of these liberal, wacky reporters, journalists, whatever you want to call him, put him in the proper place because he is just dead wrong on this matter. And folks, if you're confused, it's understandable. There are many people confused about exactly what the crime was that former President Donald Trump has now been convicted of. And I know a lot of us are enraged and very upset about this verdict and the way this has happened, but I can assure you one way or the other things are going to work themselves out. I expect very soon a very favorable report from the U.S. Supreme Court pertaining to the case as to whether or not a president has absolute immunity or some type of qualified immunity like police officers currently do under the United States Constitution. So stay tuned for all of that. Folks, if you're still with me, might as well hit the thumbs up and please like, subscribe, comment below, and let me know your opinion. Do you agree or disagree with me or Megyn Kelly or Dan Abrams? I'm interested in your perspective. Feel free to share this video with your family, friends, or any individual that you know may suffer from indoctrination. We have to educate one another. We have to help one another understand what is going on. It's always a pleasure when you take time to hear what I have to say. I don't take it for granted, and I appreciate each and every one of you. I always say, keep that mind free, never give up. And until next time, my friends, I am J.R. Dukes.